brought you to Flaming Gorge. And I mentioned I was going to talk about water a little bit, but mostly I just wanted to get up here and have a look at this thing one more time this season before water's all gone. So hang on, I'm going to turn you around so you can share the view with me and I'll explain what I'm talking about. Well, there we have it. This is the Cedar Springs area of Flaming Gorge. And you can see in the distance out there a little marina. It's not very big, but that's Cedar Springs Marina. That's where I used to keep the boats. I started out with renting a slip there for the chaparral. And then when I bought the Sea Ray, we kept it there as well. And you can also see the bridge over here, which there's a little draw that goes up behind there. It's a really pretty little spot. But the Flaming Gorge Reservoir is one of the reservoirs in the water management plan of the Upper Colorado River, and this one's actually fed by the Green River, but it flows down and the Green and the Colorado merge down around Green River, Utah, a little bit south of there. So this is one of the first big water reclamation projects on the river system that's meant to make sure all the people downstream have water all year round. And right now, as we're looking out here, we are pretty close to full. All right, I'm gonna see if I can get by through this without the sunglasses, but it's pretty bright, so I might have to put them back on. But I'm gonna give you a couple little important factoids about Flaming Gorge, just so you're up to snuff here. At full pool, basically the top of the water line is about 6,040 feet above sea level. That's basically 1,840 meters for those of you across the pond. And at full pool, this thing can hold 3.8 million acre feet of water, which equates out to 4.7 billion cubic meters. Now, how am I getting all this information? I'm right in front of the plaque that tells us all of that.
Oh, a plaque!
But basically, that important number is the 3.8 million cubic acre feet of water. That's when it's full, and right now, it's pretty close to full. I'm gonna turn you around so you can see it while I talk, so I can put my sunglasses back on. So the other day, when I had you up there on Trial Lake with me, we were up there in the Uintas, and we were on kind of the western edge of the Uintas. And today we're on kind of the eastern edge of the Uintas. Now the Uinta Mountains, if you don't know this, are the only major mountain range in the United States that runs east and west. All the rest of them run basically north and south, but the Uintas run east and west. Now, why is that, you ask? Well, because. And so anyway, this has got 3.8 million acre feet of water in it. And the Uintas up there have not got a tenth of the amount of snow they would usually have at this time of year. I'm making the numbers up about how much snow's up there, but you get my drift. There's pretty low snowpack. The runoff is going to be pretty dismal this year. Flaming Gorge is above Lake Powell. It's on the Green River system, but the Green and the Colorado join together. That's why these are all part of what they call the Green River, or the Colorado River Water Management Project, or whatever they call it. Anyway, it's all part of the same system. And the guys that manage this system, the guys and gals, just met a couple weeks ago because they had an emergency meeting to talk about the drought and the low runoff and the fact that Flaming Gorge and Lake Mead are at the lowest they've ever been since they started filling up, basically, when the dams were built. And they're nearing the point where they're not going to have enough water to actually keep pushing water through the turbines to generate electricity. And so what they decided is they're going to release 1 million acre feet of water out of Flaming Gorge here this year by Lake Powell sometime. So a third of this reservoir is going to be let out this year to feed downstream reservoirs. So let me spin you around one more time. We're going to have a look at this nice and full because we're not ever going to see it this full again, or we're not going to see it this full again for quite some time. So let's have one more good look at it, and then we'll continue on our little journey today. So there it is. nice and full. Those rocks out in the middle are going to be sticking up big time before long here as this thing starts to drain down. And the marina will probably have to be removed and, you know, put further out in the lake or something. I'm not sure what's going to happen with the marina there, because if they drop a third of this out, that thing's going to be sitting high and dry. Okay, stand by. I have to go off topic for a minute here. You know, if you followed me along for very long, I love a curvy road. And Highway 191 up near Flaming Gorge here is one of the better ones. But this particular chunk right here, I have to give a shout out to the road crew that built this. We couldn't even necessarily call it a hairpin corner because it's slightly more than 180 degrees. But this corner seems to be, in my mind, one of the most perfectly radiused corners I've ever driven. So once you get your car settled into this corner, I want you to pay close attention to my hand on the steering wheel here. You don't need to move your hand at all through the radius of this corner. You can just settle the car in and let it get around the corner, and this corner is perfectly radiused all the way around. And that doesn't happen all that often. Take an off-ramp off the, a cloverleaf off-ramp and you're constantly adjusting the wheel, and most corners aren't this nicely mapped out, but this one is a treat. Well, we've now made our way down to Lake Powell, and this is almost eerie. I am pulling up into the main parking lot for what used to be the main boat ramp, and this place looks like a ghost town. The parking lot's lines are all faded. It looks like nobody has used this place in years. All right, well, I'm going to do my best to give you the scale of the situation here. So, full pool on Lake Powell is 3,700 feet above sea level. Or for you folks over across the pond, it's 1,127.76 meters. Flaming Gorge, if you recall, its full pool was about 6,000, a little over 6,000, 40 feet above sea level, or 1,840 meters. So basically, we've scrubbed off about 2,340 feet in elevation by comparing the full pool between these two ponds. And we've also traveled south roughly 425 miles of river flowage mileage between Flaming Gorge Dam and what we would consider, the full pool point of Lake Powell, which it had to come further than that because it's down so far. As far as capacity goes, remember, Flaming Gorge was about 3.8 million acre feet. Lake Powell has the capacity to hold 24,322,000 acre feet of water. And I'll put the number of cubic meters on the screen, but it's a big number, like 20 billion and some change. All right, so if we're really going to understand this drought situation, I got to bring your attention to two additional elevations of this lake that you need to be aware of. The first is the point at which Glen Canyon Dam stops being able to generate electricity. And that elevation is 3,490 feet above sea level. And then the second one, that's a critical elevation, is 3,370 feet above sea level. That's the point at which this becomes a dead pool, meaning no water at all would be able to pass through the inlets out of the dam to flow down through the Colorado River Canyon into Lake Mead. So 3,490, we can't generate power. 3,370, we have a dead pool on our hands. Now, I checked the Department of Natural Resources website that monitors the levels of the lake before I came down here. And as of May 1st, 2026, the elevation of the lake was 3,526 feet. So basically,
36 feet above the cutoff point for power generation and 156 feet above dead pool. But here's the critical thing that you need to understand is what we're looking at here is a reservoir that is now at 23% of its full pool storage level. That means we've lost 77% of the water that was here when this thing was full. And remember, reservoirs in canyons get smaller and narrower as the canyon, as you go further down in the canyon. So as the water level recedes, as the drought continues to impact and the runoff doesn't happen, this thing can go down faster and faster and faster the lower it goes because there's less area still holding water down there. I went back through some of the history of Glen Canyon Dam, and in 1983, this thing was at full pool. In fact, we almost had a crisis on our hands in 1983. The dam was so full, it was basically 8 inches from going over the top uncontrollably. And on July 15th of 1983, it was 8 inches from going over the top. And the water managers had to be releasing a ton of water through the spillway tunnels. So Glen Canyon Dam has these tunnels that the spillway enters into, and they're these huge concrete lined tunnels. Well, what happened is, as they were letting this water out full speed, it was cavitating inside of those tunnels. Now, there's a whole report written on this cavitation process, and I've looked at that report, and in fact, here's a little snippet I'll stick in here of the cavitation theory. Now, I'm sure you're already aware of how this works, but just in case you need a refresher, here's the science behind how little tiny bubbles in the water can cause so much damage. But basically what was happening is the water managers were letting all this water out, and they were hearing strange sounds, and they started looking, and they saw basically chunks of concrete shooting out with the water. And so they wound up putting plywood planks on top of the dam to give themselves a little bit more capacity so they could kind of shut down or tone down, dial back how much water was going through these concrete tubes until they could kind of get the situation under control and the runoff peaked, and they could go in and assess what was wrong. And literally that cavitation had made chunks of the concrete just deteriorate to the point where some of it was clear back down to the underlying sandstone that they dug the tunnel through. That's the water situation. Now, there's one other thing that's a problem with this reservoir is that the Colorado River transports an enormous amount of silt. And up at Hite, where we will go and have a look at Hite, that's where the Colorado first dumps in. Now, Hite Marina is gone. It's no longer, there's no water there. In fact, there's no reservoir there. It's just a river these days. But over all the years since this thing has been built, the river has been dumping the silt at the first place where the water kind of calms down as it hits the reservoir. And it's been building this silt delta basically out into the reservoir, and it's hundreds of feet deep. And as the lake goes down and the river kind of cuts back through that, there's no place for that silt to go except it will continue to be repositioned further down the channel of the reservoir. If it gets to the dam, as I understand it, that could structurally put the dam at risk of breaking. So, there's just a lot of things here that are going to have to be resolved. And it's going to take smart people doing science and getting real about what's going on here and making, hard decisions. And I'm glad I'm not one of them that has to make that decision or those decisions, because there's no easy answers to what's going on down here. Well, you may not believe me, but this used to be the northern end of the reservoir. In fact, the reservoir used to extend further back up the river from here. This is the location of where it used to be the Hite Marina. And you can see the boat ramp still there on the side. That was underwater, or, that was a boat ramp where you could launch your boats back when the reservoir came this far up.
So where do we go from here? Well, the Bureau of Reclamation dam people, or the dam people at the Bureau of Reclamation, recently met, and I think we have some footage here from their meeting as they all worked out the issues. But they wound up at the end of this meeting publishing the post-2026 operational guidelines and strategies for Lake Powell and Lake Mead document. I, of course, downloaded and read a copy of that document. I didn't read the whole thing. It was 66 pages long. But basically, they came up with 5 alternatives of what they can do here. So let's really quickly run through them, and I'm not going to go through them in detail. You can download the document. I'll put a link to it down in the comments. But basically, there's the no action alternative, which means basically, we're not going to do anything. There's the basic coordination alternative, where basically we're going to kind of agree that we need to adjust the inflows or the outflows out of Lake Powell. There's the enhanced coordination alternative, which means we're really going to be friendly about this. There's the maximum operational flexibility alternative. And finally, there's the supply-driven alternative, which in my mind, the supply-driven alternative is the only one that matters, because it's got to be based on what's flowing into the reservoirs from the lakes, which comes from the snow, which seems like there's going to be less of that. So good thing we've got such competent government in place right now to take care of all this. I know that, the word climate change was stripped out of all government documents, and we can't even say the words now, so I'm sure this is going to be fine.